Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. My mother died when I was young. Her last words were, "See you soon." She said them to my father. I remember him kneeling beside her, folded over himself, as though someone had reached inside his stomach and was tearing him apart from the inside. I had never seen a grown man cry like that before. His whole body shook. He held her hand against his face and kept saying her name even after she stopped answering. For weeks afterward, my father barely spoke. He moved around the house like a ghost. Then one afternoon, he finally got dressed, drove to the store, and came home carrying 6 brown bottles that smelled like fire whenever he opened them. After that, he never really stopped drinking. My father wasn't the same man anymore. His lips touched bottles more often than they formed kind words. When he did speak, it usually became an argument with someone who wasn't there. Sometimes he blamed me for the bills. Sometimes he blamed my sister for what happened to our mother. Sometimes he simply sat in his recliner late at night, staring at nothing and whispering Mom's name until he fell asleep. My sister and I still loved him. We were children. Children can forgive almost anything when they don't understand it. For a long time, both of us believed Mom's death had caused everything. Dad wasn't really cruel. He was sad. Dad didn't really hate us. He missed her. If Mom came back, everything would be normal again. That was what we told ourselves. And that was why my sister and I decided to catch our mother's soul on the ghost train. Everyone in our town knew some version of the story. On Friday nights, somewhere out in the open valley beyond town, there were old railway tracks that cut through the woods. No normal train used them anymore. The rails had been abandoned for years. Roots had pushed parts of them out of the ground. Small trees had grown between the sleepers. In some places, the tracks twisted so badly that no real train could have possibly crossed them without derailing. But every Friday night, according to the legend, another kind of train came through. A train for the dead. It carried souls away from our world and into whatever came after. Some people said it went to heaven. Others said hell. Most people simply called it the ghost train and didn't pretend to know where it ended. The stories said you could hear the dead inside as it passed. Thousands of them. Crying, begging, screaming, souls full of regret clawing at old seats and windows while the train carried them farther from everyone they had loved. Some wanted another chance to apologize. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted to see their children one more time. Others simply didn't want to go wherever the train was taking them. My sister and I had heard those stories many times. They were supposed to frighten children away from the abandoned tracks. They should have frightened us too. But fear wasn't as powerful as watching our father drunk in his chair night after night. We decided we would wait for the train. Then we would climb aboard. We would search every carriage until we found Mom. And somehow, we would bring her home. It sounded simple when we planned it. Children always make impossible things sound simple. That Friday night, We slipped out after our father fell asleep. The valley was colder than I expected. Tall grass brushed against our legs as we walked, and insects jumped away from our shoes. The moon gave us enough light to follow the path without using our flashlight. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, "What do you think Mom looks like now?" My sister thought about it. "I bet she looks like a zombie." She raised both arms and made a face at me. I laughed. "Nuh-uh. I bet she still has that huge dent on her head." My sister immediately stopped smiling. No, her voice became small. I realized too late that I had upset her. "She's going to be beautiful," she said. "She's an angel now." The last part came out differently, like she was repeating something an adult had told her, but wasn't completely sure she believed. "Yeah," I said quickly. "She's probably beautiful." My sister sniffled and kept walking. A few moments later, she asked, "Do you think she'll still have our little brother in her belly?" I didn't answer. Mom had been pregnant when she died. Neither of us talked about that very often. We had lost someone we already knew, and someone we hadn't even gotten the chance to meet. Before I could decide what to say, we reached the railway. The tracks looked worse than I remembered. Dead trees crowded around them, their twisted roots lifting the rails in strange places. Young trees grew directly between sections of track. There was no possible way a locomotive could travel through there. My sister looked at me. "Do you think it's real?" "Of course." I said it immediately. I needed to believe that. We walked beside the tracks and waited. Nothing happened. The woods moved gently in the wind. Something small rustled through the grass. Minutes passed. I started wondering whether we had gotten the time wrong. Then we heard it. A distant chugging. My sister grabbed my arm. The train. The sound grew louder. Not quickly. Steadily, chug, 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 somewhere deep inside the woods, birds suddenly exploded from the branches. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Dark shapes rushed into the night sky. "It's here," I shouted. We hid behind a pair of twisted trees. The sound became thunderous. Then I saw the front of the train. It emerged between the trees like something pushing its way out of another world. The locomotive looked old. Older than any train I had ever seen. Its surface seemed black in the moonlight, but not painted black. It was more like the darkness had attached itself to the metal. Smoke poured from its stack. The front lamp glowed with a pale light. And somehow, despite the ruined railway beneath it, the train moved perfectly. It passed straight through young trees. Branches disappeared into its body and emerged again behind it without breaking. The bent tracks didn't matter. It didn't seem to be riding the rails so much as following the memory of where the rails had once gone. "Hold your breath." My sister screamed. I remembered the rule. You weren't supposed to breathe while the front of the ghost train passed. If the workers saw your breath, they would know you were alive. What happened then depended on who told the story. None of the endings were good. I filled my lungs and stopped breathing. The train reached us. Freezing wind struck my face. The engine roared past. Then came the carriages. And from inside them, I heard voices. Moaning, crying, screaming, not loud at first. Then, everywhere. Thousands of voices pressed together behind the walls of the train. I closed my eyes. My sister grabbed my hand. We held onto each other while carriage after carriage passed. My chest began hurting. Finally, the sound of the engine moved farther down the valley. Only the rolling wheels remained. I opened my eyes. The final carriage was approaching. Now, we ran. I reached the small platform at the back first and grabbed the railing. My feet slipped once. Then, I pulled myself up. My sister jumped after me. I caught her arm. Together, we landed on the rear deck of the final carriage. For several seconds, we just stood there, breathing. Cold air rushed around us. Trees blurred by. We had done it. We were on the ghost train. Do you have the coins? I asked. My sister searched her pockets. Ka-chink, ka-chink. She smiled. Then she reached into another pocket. I brought something else. She opened her hand. Mom's wedding ring. What are you doing with that? I snuck it out. According to one version of the legend, something belonging to the dead could help you see through the darkness of the first carriage. Dad's wedding ring was gone. He had thrown it into the river after Mom died. But Mom's had remained inside a little box. My sister lifted it toward her eye and held it between her cheek and eyebrow like a tiny golden monocle. Ready? No, yeah, I opened the carriage door. There was nothing behind it. Not darkness as in an unlit room, something worse. A complete absence of light. I pointed our flashlight inside. The beam disappeared. It didn't illuminate walls. It didn't illuminate a floor. It was simply swallowed. My sister moved closer. Can you see anything? No, I can't. That scared me. What? She didn't answer. She just reached for my hand. We stepped inside. The door closed behind us. Immediately, every sound disappeared. The train was gone. The wheels were gone. The wind was gone. Even my own footsteps were gone. I couldn't hear myself breathing. There was only darkness. My sister's hand remained warm inside mine. She could see through the ring, so I let her lead me. We walked, and walked, and kept walking. The carriage was impossible. From outside, it should have been maybe 30 or 40 feet long. Inside, we walked for minutes without reaching the other side. I wanted to ask my sister what she could see, but I couldn't hear my own voice. Eventually, something changed. A sound entered the darkness, wheezing, very faint. I squeezed my sister's hand twice. She stopped, then squeezed mine twice in return. She heard it too. One wheezing breath became several. Several became dozens. Then hundreds. Soon the darkness around us was filled with the sound of things desperately trying to breathe. Hollow throats, empty lungs, gasping, choking. One came so close to my ear that I felt certain something was standing directly beside me. I remembered another rule. Don't breathe. I held my breath. My sister did the same. The noises continued around us. My lungs began burning. My chest tightened. My head became light. Whatever surrounded us seemed to be waiting. I couldn't hold it anymore. A sharp breath escaped my mouth. Something grabbed my arm. I nearly screamed. A hand. Huge, cold, its fingers were long and rough. They closed around my upper arm hard enough that I felt something beneath my skin shift. My sister pulled me. The hand didn't release. I felt myself being stretched between them. Something warm ran down my leg. I had wet myself. I didn't care. My sister pulled harder. Then she released my hand for half a second. I heard a metallic sound. Coins scattering. Instantly, the darkness erupted. The wheezing became frantic. Hands scraped across the floor. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Things crawled toward the coins. The hand around my arm released me. My sister grabbed me again. We ran. I couldn't see anything. I followed the pressure of her hand. My legs burned. My lungs hurt. Behind us, the coins continued rolling across some invisible wooden floor while countless hands fought over them. Then my sister stopped. She released me. For one terrifying second, I thought she had disappeared. A bright rectangle appeared ahead. A door. I ran toward it. I stumbled through and fell face first onto a floor. Sound returned violently. The train. The wheels. My own breathing. I rolled over. The carriage was empty. Rows of old leather seats lined both sides. Fog swallowed the far end. Then my sister stumbled through the doorway behind me. I barely recognized her. Her sleeves had been torn. Long scratches covered her arms. Parts of her face were bleeding. What was in there? I cried. What the heck was in there with us? She collapsed onto her knees. It was... Her voice broke. She began sobbing. I don't want to be here anymore, but we have to find Mom. No, she screamed it. I hate this. I want to be with... She stopped. Dad. She had almost said Dad. Neither of us wanted to admit that going back to him didn't exactly feel safe either. I want to go home, she whispered. Without Mom? The question stayed between us. Outside the windows, endless dark woods moved past. I knelt beside her. Look, we just have a few more carriages. I raised my fists and punched the air, and those things were lucky it was dark. Otherwise, I would have destroyed them. She stared at me. Then she laughed. Just a tiny one. But she smiled. I would give anything to see that smile again. We continued. The carriage seemed harmless. Empty seats. Old refreshment carts. Dust. Then we passed our town. I ran to the window. The forest thinned, revealing small houses scattered across the hills. Everything was dark, except ours. Our little brick house stood near the edge of town. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney. A man stood on the lawn. Dad, even from that distance, I knew him. His hands rested on his hips. Maybe he had finally realized we were gone. Maybe he was looking for us. My sister squeezed my hand twice. Hard, I held my breath. Too late. Cold flooded the carriage. Fog appeared from nowhere. Thick white mist filled the aisle until I could barely see my own arms. My sister moved close. Her eyes were enormous. Something's watching us. I slowly looked toward the end of the carriage. Something stood there. Not a person. More like a hole where a person should have been. A shape made from darkness. Tall, far too tall. Its arms hung almost to the floor. Then those arms moved. Black fingers rushed through the fog. Too many fingers. Hands with bluish palms opened wide as they flew toward us. Everything happened too quickly. I blinked. My sister jumped in front of me. The fingers wrapped around her head. No. The arms snapped backward. It took her head with it. Her body remained standing for half a second. Then collapsed. Small, loose, twitching against the floor. The dark figure vanished. I stared at my sister. My mind refused to understand what I was seeing. Then I screamed. I ran toward the place where the creature had been. There was nothing there. I kicked the seats, hit the walls, screamed until my throat burned. Anger filled me so completely that it became pain. Then the pain became tears. I collapsed beside my sister's body. I don't know how long I stayed there. Eventually, I looked through the window. The sky was beginning to brighten. Morning, we had been told the ghost train disappeared at sunrise. I didn't have much time. Mom, we had come for Mom. I crawled toward my sister. I'm sorry. My hands shook as I searched her pockets. I found the small glass bottle. We had brought it to trap Mom's soul. There was only one. I stood. My legs barely worked. My throat felt torn apart from screaming. I crossed the carriage alone. The door at the far end seemed impossibly distant at first. Then, strangely close. Maybe the carriage itself was changing. Maybe I was losing my mind. I didn't care anymore. I reached it. For several seconds, I stood with my hand on the handle. Part of me wanted to jump from the train. Let Mom go. Run home. Pretend none of this had happened. Then I pictured my sister smiling. I opened the door. The next carriage was full. People were everywhere. Men, women, children. Some wore modern clothing. Others looked as if they belonged in photographs from 100 years ago. Workers, soldiers, people in suits, people wearing almost nothing. all dead, all screaming. Let me out. I need to see my daughter. Please. Mary. Some stood in the aisle, others sat crying. Some screamed angrily, most simply sobbed. The noise was unbearable. I pushed through them. Nobody seemed to notice me. Their grief consumed everything. Outside, dawn was turning the horizon red. Long shadows stretched from the trees. I moved faster. I passed a soldier clutching his own chest, a woman calling a child's name, an old man repeating that he was sorry, a monk, a businessman, a young woman covered in blood, a boy younger than me, every one of them waiting for whatever came at the end of the line. Then I saw her. Mom. She sat beside the window. My sister was beside her. My sister's body still had no head. Her arms were wrapped around our mother's pregnant stomach. Mom held her. She gently stroked my sister's shoulder and sang the same song she used to sing when we couldn't sleep. Mom looked exactly as I remembered her. Beautiful, except for the enormous wound in the side of her head. Blood ran down her face. Mom? She looked up. Her expression changed instantly. Oh, God. She covered her mouth. Oh, God. Baby, you're not supposed to be here. I ran to her. It's okay. I'm alive. I threw my arms around both of them. For the first time since she died, I could feel my mother. Warm, real, familiar. She touched my hair. Honey, you have to get off this train. I know. I pulled out the bottle. We came to get you. Mom stared at it. We're taking you home. She didn't answer. She hugged my sister tighter. Then she whispered something I didn't understand. I don't want to leave. I stared at her. What? I don't want to go back. Mom, she looked away. There are things you won't understand until you're older. Mom, anger exploded out of me. We did all of this for you. I grabbed my sister's clothing. Look what happened. I pulled her toward me. My sister's headless body immediately began searching for Mom. Her arms moved frantically through the air. Then they found me. She held onto my shoulders. The stump of her neck rested against me. She couldn't cry, but I knew she was afraid. She wanted Mom. We had crossed that terrible train to save her. And now, Mom was refusing to come home. Then take her. Mom screamed. I stopped. Mom collapsed into herself. I can't go back. She cried harder. I can't. My sister stumbled toward her. Mom pulled her close. Then she looked at me. Your father is a bad man. I didn't speak. Please, she whispered. Let me rest. Outside the window, the red sky was turning blue. Sunrise was coming. I looked at the bottle, then at Mom, then my sister. I didn't know what to do. For the first time that night, I felt like what I actually was, a child. Mom, my voice shook. I don't know what to do. I started crying. I'm scared. Mom opened her arms. Oh, come here, Junebug. I went to her. She held me. Everything disappeared for a moment. The screaming souls, the train, the blood, the fear. I was just a child in my mother's arms again. I smelled her hair. I felt her hand against the back of my head. I wanted that moment to last forever. Then something rushed past me. A great whooshing sound. I opened my eyes. My sister was gone. Mom was holding the bottle. Inside, it was something faint. Moving. Light. My sister. Mom had made the decision for me. She placed the bottle into my hand. Remember something, kid. Her face trembled. I love you. Mom, I'm sorry for being a coward. The carriage began fading around us. Please understand. Her voice sounded farther away. Please forgive your dumb mama. I tried to grab her. Mom. Then I was standing beside the railway tracks. Morning sunlight covered the valley. The ghost train was gone. No engine. No screaming. No dead. Birds sang softly in the trees. For a moment, I wondered if I had dreamed everything. Then I looked down. My clothes were dirty. My arm was bruised where the thing in the darkness had grabbed me. Blood had dried beneath my fingernails, and in my hand was a little glass bottle. Something faint moved inside. My sister. I stood alone beside the tracks and stared at it. All I had to do was open it. I was 14 years old when I decided I was a werewolf, not because I actually believed I was one, at least not at first. My parents had divorced about 6 months earlier, and after my dad moved out, the house changed in ways I didn't know how to explain. It became too quiet. Rooms that used to feel normal suddenly seemed much larger. At dinner, there was an empty chair nobody talked about. At night, I could hear little sounds I had never noticed before. The refrigerator humming, pipes shifting in the walls, cars passing several streets away. I hated it. So I started filling the silence with stories. They weren't meant to hurt anyone. Mostly, I wanted something interesting to happen to me. First, I told a few kids at school that I could sometimes see ghosts. Then I claimed my sense of smell had become unusually strong. After that, I started saying that I could hear frequencies through radios that normal people couldn't detect. I said nighttime made me feel more awake. I said the moon affected my moods. Little by little, the story built itself. Eventually, I revealed the horrible truth to my closest friends. I was a werewolf. According to me, I had been struggling with the curse for months. Every full moon made the creature inside me stronger, and it took everything I had to remain in control. Looking back, I don't know why I expected anyone to believe it. Then again, I was 14. 14-year-olds can believe some ridiculous things. Spencer believed me almost immediately. He had transferred to our school in October and somehow ended up in our group. He was tall and thin, with long arms and the kind of athletic build that made teachers constantly ask why he didn't play basketball. The answer was simple. Spencer cared far more about Adventure Quest than basketball. He believed in almost anything supernatural. Crystals, ghosts, haunted houses, energy fields, alien abductions. If you told Spencer that you felt strange whenever you walked past an old cemetery, he wouldn't laugh. He would ask what phase the moon had been in. So when I finally took him aside and told him I was a werewolf, his reaction was almost disappointing. He just nodded. I kind of figured. You did? Yeah, I had expected screaming, maybe fear. Instead, Spencer pulled out his phone and immediately started searching for possible cures. They're silver, obviously, he said. But that's usually for killing them. Some sites say wolfsbane can suppress transformations. That's mostly bullshit, I told him. I had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. Spencer nodded seriously. For the next 15 minutes, he showed me websites about werewolf legends while I pretended to already know everything. Becca was harder. She was strange in a completely different way. Becca always looked as if she had just realized something important, but hadn't decided whether to tell anyone. Her eyes were constantly wide. She loved horses, fantasy books, and anime where everyone remained friends and nobody important died. When I first explained my condition to her, she just stared. You're being weird. I'm serious. You're not a werewolf. I wish I wasn't. She rolled her eyes. That bothered me more than it should have. So I spent some money online and bought a pair of prosthetic fangs. They weren't cheap plastic vampire teeth. These were the kind you heated and molded so they fit properly over your real teeth. I practiced putting them in without using my hands. Eventually, I learned how to hide them inside my cheek and slide them into place with my tongue while speaking. The next time Becca questioned me, I waited for the right moment. I don't want you to be afraid of me, I said. I'm not afraid of you. You should be. I moved the fangs into place. Becca stopped talking. Her face changed. She stared at my mouth. For a moment, I wondered if I had gone too far. She looked like she was going to cry. I always knew there was something different about you, she whispered. I can't describe how good that made me feel. That should probably tell you everything you need to know about the kind of kid I was. Eric had been standing nearby during that conversation. I don't think Eric believed me for even 1 second. He was our group's resident goth. Black clothes every day, heavy boots, messy dark hair. He sometimes looked at autopsy photographs during class and quoted the Rocky Horror Picture Show like other people quoted Shakespeare. He watched my little fang trick with obvious admiration. A few days later, Eric started carrying around a tiny glass vial filled with red liquid. Blood, he said. It was food coloring. He introduced himself as the vampire of our group. I think he was mostly bored. My lie was more entertaining than whatever reality we were living in, so he joined in. We eventually gave ourselves a name, the Spectre Society. The name sounded much cooler to us than it probably does now. We dedicated ourselves to investigating every weird rumor, urban legend, haunting, monster sighting, and local mystery we could find. People at school definitely knew about us. That doesn't mean they respected us. Students avoided making eye contact with us in the hallway. Teachers would watch us pass and shake their heads. Some kids openly called us freaks. We didn't care. Or at least I pretended not to. The truth was that I loved the attention. Before the divorce, I had just been another kid. After I started telling stories, people noticed me. Even if they were laughing, they were still looking. At 14, I preferred being known as the weird werewolf kid over feeling invisible. We built our headquarters in the woods near the train tracks. Calling it a headquarters is generous. It was really a small clearing with a hut made from branches and pieces of scrap wood. We dragged old tires there and used them as chairs. Spencer found a plastic sheet somewhere and stretched it over part of the roof. When it rained, water still came through almost everywhere. We loved it. Most weekends were spent at the library. We checked out books about cryptozoology, ghosts, local murders, strange disappearances, and folklore. We looked through old newspapers. Whenever somebody claimed to have seen something strange, we wrote it down. For months, nothing genuinely interesting happened. A woman outside town claimed she had seen glowing eyes near her barn. We investigated. Raccoons? Somebody told us an abandoned house near the edge of town was haunted. We spent nearly 4 hours inside. The most terrifying thing that happened was an old light fixture falling from the ceiling next to Becca. She screamed so loudly that Eric nearly fell through a rotten floorboard. There may also have been an embarrassing accident involving somebody's pants. I won't say whose. My werewolf story continued throughout all of this. Whenever there was a full moon, I sometimes disappeared from school. I would fake being sick. Once or twice, I even used ipecac so my mom would genuinely believe something was wrong. That was stupid. Extremely stupid. But in my mind, it made the story more convincing. If I appeared healthy at school the morning after a full moon, people might start questioning things. I had built the lie so carefully that maintaining it became more important than common sense. Everything changed when Eric found a strange little book in the local history section of the library. It was written by a local author decades earlier and advertised itself as a pocket guide to the history of our area. Most of it was boring. Old photographs, letters, stories about families that had settled nearby, accounts of floods, fires, construction projects, farms, and businesses that no longer existed. I was halfway through complaining about how useless it was when Eric told me to flip toward the back. That was where we found the entry about the lying man. There wasn't one single version of the story. There were several. Different letters mentioned him in different ways. One mother warned her daughter that the lying man came for children who invented stories. Another claimed he visited children after midnight. Another said he could hear every lie spoken within a certain distance. The most common part of the legend was this: if a child told a lie often enough, the lying man could make it true. For a little while, anyway. Then he collected payment. What that payment involved depended on which account you believed. One version said he took teeth. Another said fingers. Another claimed he stole someone's voice. One old letter suggested that a child disappeared after claiming for months that he could become invisible. The letter ended with the child's mother saying that perhaps her son had finally gotten his wish. That one stayed with me. We read every mention of the lying man we could find. Spencer was fascinated. Becca looked uncomfortable. Eric thought the whole thing was hilarious. I tried to act unimpressed. Inside, however, I was nervous. A creature that punished children for lying? I had spent months telling everyone I was a werewolf. If the legend had even the smallest amount of truth behind it, I would probably be at the top of its list. Naturally, our response was to try summoning it. That weekend, we decided to spend the night in our fort. The idea was simple. Each of us would tell a lie. Then we would wait. Nothing serious. Nothing cruel. Just bait. Becca claimed she had once ridden a horse across an entire frozen lake. Spencer said one of his crystals had healed a broken finger. Eric claimed the red liquid in his vial was real blood. Everyone laughed at that one. Then they looked at me. I didn't need to say anything. My lie had been running for months. I was the werewolf. That was more than enough. We met at the fort after dark. Becca brought a flashlight and extra batteries. Spencer brought his crystals in a small cloth bag. Eric brought his blood vial. I had my prosthetic fangs in my pocket. The woods felt colder that night. Not normal winter cold. Something deeper. The kind that makes you feel as if your bones are cooling from the inside. We sat around a small fire Spencer had made. For the first hour, nothing happened. We talked. We laughed. Eric made jokes about the lying man showing up and demanding our homework. Becca repeatedly asked what time it was. Somewhere beyond the trees, a train passed. The sound slowly faded. Then everything became quiet. That was when we heard a branch snap. All four of us stopped talking. Another sound came from the darkness. Footsteps, slow, heavy, someone was approaching. A man stepped into the firelight. He was wearing a police uniform. My first reaction was disappointment. Not fear, not relief. Disappointment, we'd been caught. Spencer whispered a curse. The officer stood several feet away from us. Something about him looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. Even now, I struggle to describe his face. It wasn't blank. He had features. A nose, eyes, a mouth. Hair, but none of them seemed to belong together. It was like somebody had taken pieces from every police officer in town and combined them into a single person. His eyes reminded me of one officer. His jaw looked like another. His voice sounded vaguely familiar. Yet I couldn't name him. "What are you kids doing out here?" he asked. Nobody answered at first. Then Eric, because Eric apparently had no survival instinct, said, "We're looking for the lying man." The officer looked at us. Then he smiled. "There's no such thing as the lying man." Eric nodded toward me. "He's the expert." I glared at him. The cop looked directly at me. Something about his stare made my stomach tighten. "Well," I said, "we don't really know there's no such thing, don't we? There are stories, old records. Letters, tall tales," the officer said. He stepped closer. "Like the ones you've been telling your friends, Baron. My entire body went still. I had never told him my name. None of us had. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. The officer smiled. "What's wrong?" I reached toward my mouth instinctively, planning to put in the fangs. Then I remembered they were still in my pocket. "How do you know my name?" He ignored the question. "Did you think I wouldn't hear about your stories?" "They aren't stories," I said. I tried to make my voice sound angry. It came out weak. "Leave us alone. We're not doing anything illegal." The officer's smile grew. "Show them." I stared. "What? You've told them what you are." He pointed at my friends. "Show them." Spencer looked at me. So did Becca. Even Eric stopped smiling. Sweat formed along my forehead despite the cold. "I don't want to. Why? I can't control it." My voice shook. "I could hurt somebody." The officer calmly reached for his gun. Every joke disappeared. He drew the weapon and pointed it directly at me. Becca gasped. Spencer stood. Eric froze. The woods became impossibly quiet. "Show them," the officer said softly. I couldn't move. His gun remained aimed at my chest. My friends were watching me. Waiting, I reached into my pocket. My fingers touched the fake fangs. They suddenly felt pathetic. Tiny pieces of plastic. Months of lies reduced to two fake teeth sitting in my hand. There was no fur beneath my skin. No hidden claws. No monster waiting inside me. I wasn't cursed. I wasn't special. I was a lonely 14-year-old kid whose parents had gotten divorced, and I had invented something because being a monster felt better than being ordinary and miserable. I pulled my empty hand back out. Nobody spoke. Spencer stared at me. Becca's expression slowly changed. Eric looked down. The silence hurt more than anything the officer could have said. I could already imagine what would happen next. The Spectre Society was finished. They would never trust me again. They would realize how stupid they had been. I felt tears building in my eyes. The officer lowered the gun. His expression softened. For some reason, he looked pleased, like someone who had finally figured out a difficult puzzle. Then, his neck cracked. We all heard it. A dry, sharp pop. The officer tilted his head. Another crack. His shoulders moved. Something underneath his uniform shifted. Becca whispered, "What the hell?" The officer smiled. His teeth started falling out. One by one. They dropped onto the dirt. Small white pieces landing near his boots. New teeth pushed through his gums. Longer, sharper. His face stretched. The skin around his mouth tore. Dark fur burst through his cheeks and forehead. Not growing smoothly. Pushing through, breaking skin. Blood ran through the fur. His arms lengthened. Bones snapped. Elbows twisted. Fingers stretched into claws. His knees bent in directions knees shouldn't bend. The police uniform ripped apart as his body grew. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. The thing standing in front of us had become the creature I had spent months pretending to be. Except nothing about it looked like the werewolves in movies. It was wrong. Too tall. Too thin in some places. Too thick in others. Its mouth opened wider than a human head should allow. The jaws were enormous. Blood and saliva hung between the teeth. Then, it moved. Spencer was closest. The creature hit him once. There was a sound like wet wood breaking. Spencer folded. He hit the ground so hard that his face bounced off the dirt. Becca screamed. That broke whatever spell had frozen us. We ran. No plan, no direction, just away. Branches struck my face. I heard Eric behind me. Becca was somewhere to my right. Then she fell. I turned. Her foot had caught on something. She landed hard. The creature was already moving toward her. Becca did the strangest thing. She raised one hand. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe all those years loving horses made her think some part of the creature could could be calmed. "Easy," she whispered. The thing opened its mouth. It took her in 2 bites. I heard the first scream, not the second. I stopped running. My mind couldn't understand what I had seen. Eric grabbed my arm. "Move." He pulled me. My legs finally started working. We ran through the trees. I could see the edge of the woods ahead. Beyond it were the train tracks, and farther away, streetlights, civilization, safety. We were almost there. Then I heard a crunch behind me. Eric jerked backward. I turned. The creature had one hand around the base of his spine. Its fingers were buried inside him. Eric opened his mouth. Blood spilled over his lips. The creature squeezed. There was a loud pop. Eric's legs collapsed. He screamed and hit the ground. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe guilt. Maybe panic. Maybe some stupid part of me still wanted to become the hero I had spent months pretending to be. I charged at the creature. I punched it, kicked it, grabbed its arm, tried to pull it away from Eric. It barely reacted. Then it struck me. I didn't even see the hand move. The next thing I knew, my face hit the ground. Pain came a second later. The world spun, my mouth filled with dirt. Somewhere above me, the creature laughed. "Thank you." Its voice was wrong. Deep, wet. But underneath it, I could still hear the police officer. I haven't been fed like that in so long. I tried to lift my head. Everything blurred. "Please." That was all I could manage. "Please don't. Please don't kill me. Please let Eric live. Please somehow make Spencer and Becca get back up." The creature didn't attack. Instead, it made a satisfied sound. I heard it pat its stomach. "Do keep doing whatever it is you're doing." It leaned closer. Its breath smelled like blood. Your stories were most satisfying. Then it walked away. Just like that. Branches snapped as it disappeared into the woods. I lay beside Eric. Neither of us could move much. I don't remember how long we stayed there. Eventually, everything went black. We both survived. Spencer and Becca didn't. The doctors said Eric had suffered catastrophic damage to his spine. They used words like permanent. They said paralysis, waist down. They explained surgeries, rehabilitation, wheelchairs. I listened from my own hospital bed and understood almost none of it. Eric never blamed me. That somehow made it worse. He never screamed at me. Never told anyone that everything had happened because of my lies. Never asked why I had made them believe me. The last time I saw him, he was being pushed down a hospital hallway. Our eyes met. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired. Empty. He looked away. I understood. He never wanted to see me again. I don't blame him. Sometimes I replay that night in my head. Not the real version. A different one. The version I wish had happened. In that version, the officer tells me to show everyone what I am. I transform. The fangs become real. Fur tears through my skin. My bones change. When the creature attacks Spencer, I stop it. When it moves toward Becca, I stand in the way. I fight it. Maybe I get hurt. Maybe I die. But my friends live. In that version, all my lies become true in exactly the way I want it. I'm special. I'm dangerous. I'm powerful. I'm the monster who saves everyone. But the story never lasts long. Reality always returns. Spencer was killed first. Becca died trying to calm something that couldn't be calmed. Eric lost the use of his legs. And I survived. The liar. The one who started everything. I don't tell stories like that anymore. I don't pretend to see ghosts. I don't claim I can smell things other people can't. I don't fake illnesses. I don't wear prosthetic fangs. I learned that lies can grow beyond you. Sometimes people believe them. Sometimes you start believing pieces of them yourself. And sometimes something else is listening, something hungry. I still don't know exactly what the lying man was. Maybe the legend had gotten the details wrong. Maybe it doesn't punish liars. Maybe it feeds on the moment a lie collapses, on embarrassment, on betrayal, on fear. Or maybe it really does make your stories true for a little while and then collects payment afterward. If that's the case, I suppose I got exactly what I asked for. For months, I wanted desperately to be a werewolf. That night, one finally appeared. These days, whenever there's a full moon, I don't feel stronger. I don't feel more awake. I don't hear distant frequencies or smell things nobody else can. I just remember the woods. I remember Spencer folding after one hit. I remember Becca raising her hand and whispering to that thing like it was a frightened animal. I remember Eric screaming when its fingers closed around his spine. And I remember the creature leaning over me, thanking me for feeding it. So when the moon is full now, I don't stare at it proudly like I used to. I wince. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. The phone rang at 2:50 in the morning. Not my cell phone. Not one of the office lines in the back room. The phone sitting directly in front of me at the reception desk. I glanced at the small display and felt my tired eyes narrow. Room 801. The phone kept ringing. I stared at those numbers for another second before finally reaching for the receiver. At that hour, I was already exhausted enough to question whether I had read the screen correctly. Working nights at the Red Pharaoh Hotel was bad enough on its own, but I was also working during the day as a high school math teacher. Between the two jobs, I had reached the point where I sometimes forgot which building I was in. The Red Pharaoh was one of the oldest Art Deco hotels in downtown Chicago. In its better years, it had probably been impressive. Even now, tourists love the old gold decorations, patterned carpets, brass elevator doors, and strange Egyptian-inspired details scattered throughout the lobby. At almost 3 in the morning, though, none of it felt elegant. It felt empty, too empty. The lobby lights had been dimmed. The front doors showed only reflections and darkness beyond the glass. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. The phone rang again. I finally answered. Front desk, this is Gil. How can I help you? For a moment, all I heard was static. Then a man's voice came through. This is Katz. My VCR's fucked. Can you send help? I pulled the receiver slightly away from my ear. The connection was terrible. I'm sorry, sir, the line is breaking up. Could you repeat that? More static. This is Katza. My VCR isn't working and trying to watch a tape. Can you... The rest disappeared beneath a loud burst of interference. The man's voice sounded strangely distant, as though he were calling from somewhere far beyond the walls of the hotel. Still, there was something confident in the way he spoke. He sounded like the kind of man who expected people to do what he asked. I leaned back in my chair. I'm sorry, Mr. Katza, but our rooms don't have VCRs. We got rid of those years ago. The televisions have cable channels and streaming services. If you use the remote, the line crackled. The fuck? I'm sorry, only streaming will... Be blood streaming out of your nose, punk. I stopped smiling. There are certain things you learn when you work nights at a hotel. Drunk guests call because they can't find their room key while they're holding it. Couples complain about noises coming from rooms that are actually empty. People ask ridiculous questions. Some guests become aggressive for no reason at all. After enough night shifts, very little surprises you. So instead of reacting, I kept my voice professional. Again, I apologize, Mr. Katza. Is there anything else I can help you with? Silence, then static. Loud breathing came through the receiver. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. When his voice returned, the anger had disappeared. That somehow made it worse. I'll leave a tape. The elevator for you, Gil. I sat forward. What? Maybe you'd like to see what I see. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the receiver. For a while, I simply stared at the phone. It had definitely been strange, but strange calls were part of the job. I was already preparing to dismiss it as some drunk guest trying to scare the night clerk when I looked at the display again. Room 801. My stomach tightened. The Red Pharaoh had 7 floors. That was it. 7. The first number in every room number represented the floor. Room 312 was on the 3rd floor. Room 604 was on the 6th. Room 801 should have been on the 8th floor. We didn't have an 8th floor. I stared at the display as if the numbers might change. They didn't. Room 801. I picked up the hotel directory and checked anyway. There was no 801. Of course there wasn't. I had worked there long enough to know the building. I suddenly remembered the name the caller had given me. Katza, or something close to it. The computer at the front desk looked almost as old as the hotel, but it worked well enough for basic searches. I opened a browser and typed Katza, Chicago. Nothing useful appeared. I tried a few variations. Katza filmmaker. Katza Red Pharaoh. Then Google suggested another name. Katsaros. I clicked it. Several old articles appeared. The first few results described a Greek-American filmmaker named Alexander Katsaros, who had gained a small following in the late 1980s and early 1990s. His films were experimental, disturbing, and apparently difficult to understand. Critics called some of his work brilliant. Others called it pointless. The more I read, the more uncomfortable I became. Katsaros had disappeared in 1996. 30 years earlier. No body had ever been found. No confirmed sightings. Nothing. Then I found the detail that made me stop breathing for a second. Alexander Katsaros had last been seen entering the Red Pharaoh Hotel. My hotel. I reread the article. Then I checked another source. Same information. Witnesses had seen Katsaros arrive at the hotel carrying several cases of filming equipment. At some point during the night, he disappeared. His equipment disappeared with him. Police investigated. Nothing came of it. I sat completely still behind the desk. A man who had vanished from this hotel 30 years ago had apparently just called me from a room that didn't exist. I wanted to laugh. I almost did. Then I remembered what he had said. I'll leave a tape. The elevator. For you. Maybe you'd like to see what I see. I looked toward the elevator bay. The lobby suddenly felt much larger than it had a few minutes earlier. The Red Pharaoh had 4 elevators. All 4 doors were decorated with old golden patterns that tourists love taking pictures of during the day. At 3 in the morning, they looked like 4 sealed metal mouths. I told myself not to be ridiculous. Somebody was messing with me. Maybe another employee had found out about Katsaros and decided to play a prank. Maybe there was some way to make the phone system display a fake room number. That had to be it. Still, I got out of my chair. I walked around the desk and crossed the lobby. Nothing happened. I pressed the call button. One of the elevators opened. Empty. I stepped inside and looked at the buttons. Lobby 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, no 8. Obviously, I checked the second elevator. Same thing. Then the third. Then the fourth. 7 floors. Just as there had always been. For reasons I still can't properly explain, that wasn't enough. I rode one elevator to the 7th floor. The doors opened onto a silent hallway. Everything looked normal. Room numbers beginning with 7 lined the walls. A soft golden light came from old fixtures near the ceiling. Somewhere far down the hall, an air conditioner hummed. No hidden staircase. No mysterious door. No room 801. I unlocked the stairwell and climbed toward the roof. Nothing. The building ended exactly where it was supposed to. 7 floors. Roof, Chicago skyline. That was all. I stood there for a moment, feeling stupid. Lack of sleep was getting to me. That had to be the explanation. I went back downstairs. When the elevator doors opened into the lobby, I stepped out and immediately stopped. Something was lying on the floor. A black VH tape. It sat upright near the center of the elevator bay. I had walked through that exact area less than 10 minutes earlier. There had been nothing there. I slowly approached it. No one else was in the lobby. I looked toward the front doors. Locked, I checked the security monitors. Nothing unusual. The tape remained where it was. I picked it up. It felt strangely heavy. Not impossibly heavy, but heavier than I expected from an old piece of plastic. A white sticker had been placed along its spine. Someone had written on it in black marker, Purgatorio, tapes 3. I read the words twice. Purgatorio, I whispered. I knew enough literature to recognize the word. Purgatory, the place between heaven and hell. I turned the cassette over. No other writing, no production company, no date, nothing. Just that label. Purgatorio, tapes 3. The rational thing would have been to throw it away. The even more rational thing would have been to call my manager and report everything. Instead, I put the tape inside my backpack. I wish I could tell you why. Curiosity. Probably. Maybe stupidity. The two are close relatives. I went back to the desk and tried watching a movie on my phone for the rest of the shift, but I barely understood anything happening on the screen. Every few minutes, my eyes moved toward my backpack. I kept imagining that phone call, that voice. Maybe you'd like to see what I see. When my shift ended, I drove home. There wasn't time to sleep. I showered, changed clothes, made breakfast, and prepared for my second job. That had become my life. Night clerk at a hotel. Math teacher during the day. Single father somewhere in between. My daughter was only a few years away from college. She had rheumatoid arthritis, and her medication wasn't cheap. Her mother wasn't around anymore, which meant everything rested on me. I worked because I had to. Whenever my daughter asked whether I was tired, I told her I was fine. Whenever she worried about money, I told her not to. Whenever she noticed me falling asleep at the kitchen table, I joked about getting old. The truth was that I was struggling. I hated how much time I was missing with her. Some evenings, I left her home alone while I went to the hotel. Some mornings, I returned just as she was waking up. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Just get her through school. Just get her medicine. Just get enough money saved. Then, things would become easier. That morning, we ate breakfast together like usual. I didn't tell her about room 801. I didn't tell her about Katsaros. And I definitely didn't tell her about the VH tape sitting inside my backpack. By the time I arrived at school, I had already decided that I wasn't going to watch it. That decision lasted about 3 hours. I taught algebra while thinking about the tape. I wrote equations on the board while wondering how it had appeared in the lobby. I asked students to solve problems. while part of my brain kept returning to that label. Purgatorio Tapes 3. By lunchtime, curiosity had won. There was one problem. Where exactly was I supposed to find a VCR in 2026? Then I remembered the basement. Our school building had been around for decades. Like most old schools, it had storage rooms filled with equipment nobody had bothered throwing away. During lunch, while students flooded the halls on their way to the cafeteria, I slipped into a back storage area used by the maintenance staff. Behind several shelves was a freight elevator. I wrote it down. The basement looked exactly like the kind of place where an old VCR would survive. Concrete walls, exposed pipes, dust, spiderwebs, old desks, broken chairs, boxes that probably hadn't been opened since I was a teenager. One area smelled damp from years of slow leaks. I searched for almost 15 minutes. Then I found it. A black metal television cart stood in the corner. A huge old television sat on top, held in place by a dirty strap. On the shelf beneath it was a VCR. For once, luck seemed to be helping me. I rolled the cart toward an electrical outlet. Its wheels screamed across the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the basement. I plugged everything in. The television turned on with a faint electronic hum. Static filled the screen. I removed the VHS tape from my backpack. For a moment, I hesitated. Something about the whole situation suddenly felt different now that I was actually about to watch it. If it was just an old horror film, fine. If somebody was playing a prank, fine. But what if it wasn't? I almost put the tape away. Instead, I pushed it into the VCR. The machine swallowed it with a loud mechanical clunk. I pressed play. Here goes nothing, I muttered. The television screen flickered. Static, black, white lines. Distortion, a strange buzzing sound came from the speakers. Then I heard insects, cicadas, maybe, for several seconds. Nothing else appeared. I actually started feeling relieved. Maybe the tape had been damaged. Then the picture suddenly snapped into place. Black and white footage filled the screen. It had clearly been recorded on an old camcorder. The image shook violently. Whoever held the camera was breathing hard. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Then, the image stabilized for a moment. An old man was kneeling in white sand. He was naked, thin, almost skeletal. A long, wiry beard hung from his face. He was trembling. Behind him rose enormous stone walls. I leaned closer. It looked like an ancient arena. Something Roman, maybe a Colosseum. But the architecture was wrong. The arches seemed bent at impossible angles. Columns leaned in directions that should have caused the entire structure to collapse. Some sections appeared too narrow at the bottom to support what rested above them. The stone itself looked covered in something dark, almost like black paint. Large statues towered over the arena. I couldn't recognize any of them. Some looked vaguely human, others definitely did not. One statue seemed to have several mouths carved into its chest. Another had the body of a man, but a twisted head with long horns. The camera moved. The picture stretched. For a second, everything on the screen became distorted. Then it snapped back. The old man had started crying. His shoulders shook. Around him, darkness filled several archways at ground level. Something moved inside them. Then came the sounds. Growling, shrieking, low rumbles. The old man looked from one doorway to another. He put his hands together. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but it looked like he was praying. The person holding the camera began breathing faster. The image shook. I felt myself leaning toward the television, even though every instinct told me to turn it off. Dark fog appeared above the arena. At least, I think it was fog. It moved strangely. It seemed too thick, almost alive. Dust began blowing across the sand. The old man screamed. Something moved inside one of the black archways. The camera turned toward it. For 1 second, there was nothing. Then a creature exploded out of the darkness. It was shaped almost like a human being, but its limbs were much too long. Its skin looked dark red. 2 thick horns curved from its head. Before the old man could run, the creature struck him. His head separated from his body. I jumped backward from the television. The footage continued. The creature stood over the body. Then another sound came from the opposite side of the arena. A second figure appeared. This one was gray. It wore torn black cloth. 2 ruined wings stretched from its back, made of what looked like skin, bone, and muscle. Its eyes were completely dark. The first creature turned toward it. The second creature screamed. Then both attacked each other. The old man's body was caught between them. What followed was difficult to watch. Claws, horns, teeth, wings, blood covered the white sand. The picture kept jumping and distorting as the person filming backed away. I put both hands over my mouth. What the hell? On the television, the person behind the camera screamed. I froze. I knew that voice. It was deeper and clearer now without the telephone static. But there was no question. It was the man who had called the hotel. Katsaros, the filmmaker who had disappeared in 1996. The man who had called from room 801. The camera suddenly turned away from the arena. The footage bounced wildly as Katsaros ran. He entered one of the dark tunnels beneath the stands. I could hear his shoes hitting stone. His breath came in desperate gasps. The camera struck a wall. The picture became static, then returned. For less than a second, I thought I saw something moving behind him. Then, the screen went black. Nothing. No credits. No title. No explanation. Just darkness. I sat there, staring at the television. The VCR continued humming. My heart was pounding. I finally pressed stop. The machine made a mechanical click. The silence in that basement suddenly felt enormous. I removed the tape and held it in my hands. I didn't know what I had watched. A horror film? Maybe Katsaros had been a filmmaker. Maybe he had made some strange underground movie before disappearing. Maybe the whole thing was practical effects. Costumes, miniatures, sets, good editing. That explanation should have made me feel better. It didn't, because I kept thinking about the arena, the impossible architecture, the old man, those creatures. And most importantly, I kept thinking about how the tape had reached me. Even if the footage was fake, the phone call wasn't. Room 801 didn't exist. The VH tape had appeared in an empty hotel lobby after a dead or missing man told me exactly where he would leave it. I returned to class that afternoon and somehow finished the day. I don't remember much of what I taught. A few days passed. I didn't watch the tape again. I stored it inside a cardboard box on the highest shelf of my bedroom closet. Part of me wanted to destroy it. Another part wanted to take it to the police. But what would I tell them? A missing filmmaker called me from a non-existent hotel room and gave me a VHS recording of monsters fighting in purgatory. I could already imagine the conversation. So I did nothing. A few nights later, I was back at the Red Pharaoh. The lobby was quiet. I sat behind the front desk doing a crossword puzzle and trying not to think about Katsaros. My blood pressure had finally started returning to normal. I had almost convinced myself that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the tape showed some forgotten experimental film. Maybe somebody connected to Katsaros had found it and was recreating his disappearance as some elaborate joke. Maybe room 801 was simply a malfunction in the hotel's phone system. None of those explanations made complete sense, but they were better than the alternative. because the alternative meant accepting that the tape had shown me something real. Purgatory, demons, lost souls, whatever existed between heaven and hell. I stared down at the crossword. One clue had been bothering me for several minutes. I was trying to think of the answer when the phone rang. Ring, I looked up. Ring, my eyes moved toward the display. The pencil slipped from my fingers. Room 801. Ring, I didn't move. Every part of me told me to leave the phone alone, let it ring, call security, walk away. Instead, I reached for it. My hand was shaking. I slowly lifted the receiver. Hello? Static filled my ear. Exactly like before. White noise, interference, a distant crackling sound. Then, silence. I waited. My mouth had gone dry. Mr. Katsaros? More static. Then his voice came through. Clearer than before. Calm. Almost curious. What do you think of the afterlife, Gil? My husband and I had never been happier than the day we bought our first house. It was not beautiful, not even close. The place was old, weathered, and clearly neglected by whoever had owned it before us. The paint was peeling from parts of the exterior. Several windows were cracked. Some doors needed to be lifted slightly before they would close properly. The floorboards creaked everywhere, and a few of them felt soft enough that I worried one day a foot might go straight through. But it was ours. Daryl and I had only been married for a short time, and neither of us earned much money. We had spent months looking at houses we could never afford before finally finding this one. It was cheap because it needed so much work, but when we stood in the empty living room for the first time after getting the keys, I remember Daryl wrapping his arms around me and saying that none of the damage mattered. We would fix it together. At the time, that sounded romantic. Within the first few weeks, however, we realized how unrealistic that idea was. Neither of us had much experience with repairs. I could paint a wall, and Daryl could handle basic tools, but this house needed far more than that. The stair railing was loose enough to shake with one hand. Parts of the plaster were crumbling. Shelves leaned away from the walls. Several hinges were rusted. The attic had rotten floorboards, and one section of the kitchen countertop moved whenever anyone leaned against it. The more closely we looked, the longer our list became. Eventually, we admitted that we needed professional help. The problem was money. Hiring different contractors for everything would have cost far more than we could afford, so when one of Daryl's co-workers mentioned a handyman who supposedly did excellent work for surprisingly low prices, it sounded almost too good to be true. His co-worker's name was Scott. According to him, the handyman's name was Jim. There isn't anything the guy can't fix, Scott told Daryl. Seriously, plumbing, woodwork, windows, floors, whatever, and he won't destroy your bank account. That was all we needed to hear. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder how different our lives would have been if Scott had never opened his mouth. We could have lived with the crooked shelves. We could have stepped carefully around the broken floorboards. We could have ignored the ugly walls and cracked windows and pretended our little wreck of a house was perfect. Daryl would still be alive. But that night, sitting together on our worn sofa surrounded by boxes we had not yet unpacked, Daryl called the number Scott had given him. A man answered almost immediately. "Hello, handyman Jim speaking. You break it, I fix it. What can I do for you today?" His voice was deep but cheerful, the kind of voice that immediately made you picture someone friendly. Daryl laughed. "Hi, my wife and I just bought a house, and we're in desperate need of a handyman. Congratulations, thanks. What needs fixing?" Daryl looked around the room. "Where should I start?" We decided the staircase should come first. The railing beside the stairs and along the upstairs landing was dangerously loose. If someone leaned against it too hard, I was certain the entire thing would give way. Since it was also a relatively straightforward job compared with some of the other repairs, we thought it would be a good way to test Jim's work. He offered to come the following morning. Exactly at 10, a gray pickup truck stopped outside our house. I watched from the front window as the driver climbed out. For some reason, Jim was not what I had expected. He looked somewhere in his mid-40s, but remarkably healthy for a man who supposedly spent every day doing physical labor. He had short brown hair without any visible gray, a broad face, and an easy smile. His body was fit and muscular beneath a clean pair of carpenter's overalls. Even his clothes surprised me. There was no dust on them, no paint, no grease. They looked freshly pressed. He walked toward the porch carrying a toolbox and smiled at us. "You must be Jeanette and Daryl." Daryl shook his hand. "That's us. What a pleasure to meet you." His handshake was firm but not aggressive. Then he looked past us into the house. "Now, where's this railing that's causing you trouble?" We showed him upstairs. Jim examined the loose wood for perhaps 30 seconds before nodding. "Shouldn't be a problem." That sentence quickly became something we heard often. Daryl and I stayed out of his way while he worked. Every few minutes, Jim returned to his truck for wood, tools, nails, or another piece of equipment. He laid protective sheets across the floor before beginning and kept everything strangely organized. Whenever I passed the hallway, I would stop for a few seconds and watch. The man worked incredibly fast. He never seemed uncertain. There was no stopping to measure something twice or scratching his head while considering what to do next. His movements were smooth and confident, like someone repeating a task he had performed thousands of times. Hammer, measure, cut, drill, fit. Every movement seemed to naturally lead into the next one. I remember feeling relieved. Whatever Scott had said about Jim was apparently true. We had found someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Only a few hours later, the construction noises stopped. Jim appeared at the living room doorway, all finished. Daryl and I followed him to the stairs. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. The transformation was unbelievable. The old, unstable railing had been replaced with dark, polished wood that looked as if it belonged in a much more expensive house. Every post was evenly spaced. Every joint fit perfectly. Nothing moved when Daryl grabbed the railing and pulled against it. Even the floor around the staircase was spotless. No sawdust, no nails, no scraps of wood. "Nothing, wow," Daryl said. "Jim, this is incredible." Jim smiled. "Glad you like it. You did all this today? That's what you hired me for." Daryl laughed and asked me to get his wallet. I expected the price to hurt. Work that good should have been expensive. Instead, Jim named an amount so low that Daryl actually asked him to repeat it. Jim did. It was only a small fraction of what I had expected. That should have bothered me. Excellent work, unbelievable speed, almost no money. Nothing about that combination made sense. But we were young, newly married, and trying desperately to repair a house without going broke. Instead of questioning our luck, we celebrated it. Daryl counted out the money and handed it over. That was when I first noticed something strange about Jim. He took the notes and carefully divided them into 2 equal piles. Not approximately equal, exactly equal. He counted them twice, adjusting the piles until each contained the same number of notes. Then, he put one stack into his left back pocket and the other into his right. Daryl and I exchanged a look. Jim noticed. "Balance is important," he said with a grin. He spread his hands as if explaining something obvious. "It's what keeps houses from toppling over." Then he looked directly at me. people too. Daryl chuckled. I smiled awkwardly. At the time, it seemed harmless. Everyone had strange habits, and after seeing his work, we were more interested in hiring him again than questioning how he organized his money. That same evening, we called him about repairing part of the ceiling near the entrance. Daryl tried using his phone, but it suddenly refused to turn on. It had been working perfectly earlier. We assumed the battery had died or something inside had finally failed. I used my phone instead. Jim answered just as cheerfully as before. He returned a few days later. Then again, the following week. Eventually, hiring Jim became normal. Over the next several months, he repaired nearly every damaged part of our house. The ceiling, the windows, the kitchen countertop, the attic flooring, several doors, broken shelves, parts of the bathroom, woodwork around the porch. Every time, he arrived almost exactly when promised. Every time, he came alone. And every time, he completed work far faster than seemed reasonable. I once watched him begin repairing a section of damaged wall in the morning. I went grocery shopping, expecting him to still be working when I returned. Less than 2 hours later, he was cleaning his tools. The wall looked new. I started joking that Jim was not a handyman, but a machine. He always laughed when I said it. As we became more comfortable with him, Daryl and I learned more about his obsession with balance. Everything around Jim seemed symmetrical. His clothes always sat perfectly on his body. His sleeves were rolled to exactly the same height. His shoelaces were tied identically. His toolbox was organized so that the tools on one side seemed to mirror those on the other. If we brought him lunch, he would arrange the food evenly before eating. 2 sandwiches, 2 napkins, 2 bottles of water. One day, I handed him a plate with 3 cookies. He stared at them for a moment. Then he broke the 3rd cookie exactly in half and placed 1 piece on either side of the plate. I laughed. You really weren't joking about the balance thing. Jim smiled. No, ma'am. After that, we started playing along. If I brought him snacks, I arranged them symmetrically. If I gave him ice in a glass, I sometimes made sure there were an even number of cubes. Daryl thought it was hilarious. One afternoon, I noticed a small rip near one of the seams of Jim's work shirt. Since I knew it would probably bother him, I offered to repair it. He looked genuinely pleased. That would be very kind of you. I stitched the tear closed as neatly as I could and handed the shirt back the next time he visited. Jim carefully examined my work. Then he smiled. Perfect. I had no idea how important that shirt would eventually become. Little by little, our terrible house changed. The cracked, neglected rooms began to feel warm. The staircase looked expensive. The kitchen became clean and solid. The windows no longer rattled. The bathroom looked almost new. Daryl and I started talking about children. We had always planned to have a family, but we wanted the house safe first. For the first time, that future seemed close. Then, things began breaking. At first, we barely noticed the pattern. Daryl's phone had been the first. Then, other things started failing. Not old things, not damaged things. Objects that had worked perfectly suddenly stopped working. More troubling was what happened because of those failures. The day Jim repaired the loose kitchen countertop, our television stopped working. Normally, that would have been an annoyance. That evening, however, we were planning a trip to the beach. Because the television was dead, we missed an emergency weather warning regarding severe storms and dangerous flooding. The next day, while returning from the coast, we became trapped by rapidly rising water. For several terrifying minutes, our car sat in water that kept climbing around the tires. We escaped before it became impossible to drive out. We considered ourselves lucky. Then Jim replaced our cracked living room windows. That night, Daryl took me to dinner at a rooftop restaurant. I wore a pair of high heels I had used dozens of times. While we were outside looking over the city, one of the heels snapped. My ankle twisted. I stumbled toward the edge of the rooftop terrace. Daryl caught my arm before I fell. For the next few days, I could not stop thinking about how close I had come to going over. Then, Jim repaired the rotten attic floorboards. The following morning, Daryl's car brakes failed on his way to work. He later told me he pressed the pedal as he approached an intersection and felt almost nothing. The car kept moving. He pulled the handbrake and somehow managed to stop before drifting into oncoming traffic. When he came home, his hands were still shaking. That was when I started making connections. I wrote the incidents down. Jim fixes staircase. Daryl's phone breaks. Jim fixes kitchen. Television breaks. Jim fixes windows. My shoe breaks. Jim fixes attic. Car brakes fail. It looked ridiculous on paper. But the timing was exact. Every major repair seemed followed by something else breaking. And whatever broke always placed one of us in danger. I mentioned it to Daryl. He stared at me for a few seconds before laughing. Jeanette, come on. I'm serious. You're saying Jim fixes our house and somehow that makes my brakes stop working? I don't know what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? I had no answer. It sounded insane. Jim was not even around when most of those objects failed. There was no way he could have tampered with my shoe at a restaurant. There was no way he knew what route Daryl would drive to work. There was no way he could predict a flash flood. So I stopped talking about it. For a while. Then I saw the nail. Jim was working downstairs one afternoon while I was nearby. I heard the sudden mechanical snap of his nail gun, followed by a sharp metallic sound. Jim looked down. A long nail lay near his boot. What happened, I asked. Misfire, I walked closer. I could have sworn the nail had struck his forearm. I had seen it. It hit him and bounced away. But when I looked at his skin, there was no blood, not even a mark. Jim noticed me staring. Something wrong? I thought that hit you. He glanced at his arm. Guess not. Then he smiled and continued working. I stood there for another few seconds. Something inside me had changed. I began watching Jim more carefully. For someone who worked with dangerous equipment constantly, he never seemed injured. No cuts, no bruises, no splinters, nothing. His hands were rough, but there were no scars. I also started thinking about how young he looked. Scott had spoken as if Jim had been doing this work for years. Yet the man never seemed tired. He never complained about his back. He never limped. He never even seemed to sweat much. I told myself I was becoming paranoid. Then my inhaler broke. Jim had spent most of that day retilling our bathroom. He left shortly before dinner. Maybe 20 minutes later, I felt my chest tightening. I had suffered from asthma since childhood, so I knew the feeling immediately. I reached for my inhaler. I pressed down. Nothing. I tried again. Nothing. The mechanism had jammed. My breathing became worse. I remember standing in the hallway, desperately clicking the inhaler while trying to pull air into my lungs. Every breath became smaller. My chest burned. My vision began darkening around the edges. I hit the inhaler against the wall and tried again. Nothing. I genuinely believed I was going to die. Somehow, after what felt like forever, my breathing slowly began settling. I sat on the floor for nearly half an hour afterward. When Daryl found me, I was still shaking. That night, we had our first serious argument about Jim. I don't want him back here, I said. Daryl rubbed his forehead. Jeanette, no, listen to me. Every time that man fixes something, something else breaks. Things break. Things that almost kill us. You're connecting things because you're scared. And what about the nail? You don't even know it hit him. I saw it. You thought you saw it. I hated him for saying that. Not because he was being cruel, but because part of me worried he was right. Maybe fear had made me irrational. Maybe after several close calls, my mind was desperate to find a cause. We argued for nearly an hour. Eventually, we compromised. Jim already had several jobs scheduled. We would let him finish those. Then we would stop hiring him. I agreed. It is the decision I regret most in my life. Darryl had diabetes. Years earlier, doctors had fitted him with an insulin pump that helped control his condition. He depended on it, but we had never experienced any serious problems with the device. Then Jim came to repair our bed frame. The job was simple. One side had begun sagging, and several pieces of wood underneath had cracked. Jim arrived in the morning. A few hours later, the bed was perfect. That evening, Darryl's insulin pump malfunctioned. By the time anyone understood what was happening, his blood sugar had become dangerously unstable. He collapsed. An ambulance took him to the hospital. I remember running through the hospital corridors, crying, barely understanding what the nurses were telling me. Darryl had fallen into a diabetic coma. The severe imbalance had also caused a stroke. He was alive, but only barely. For most of that weekend, I sat beside his bed. Machines surrounded him. Tubes ran into his body. A ventilator helped him breathe. Every few minutes, some monitor made a noise that caused my heart to jump. I kept holding his hand and telling him I was there. I apologized even though he could not hear me. I apologized for the arguments, for the house, for Jim, for not stopping it sooner. Then, on Monday morning, I remembered something. Jim was supposed to come to our house that day. We had scheduled him weeks earlier to repair and rebuild part of the backyard patio awning. The thought hit me so hard that I stood up from the hospital chair. Every repair. Something breaks. Every single time. I looked around Darryl's room, at the ventilator, the monitors, the machines keeping my husband alive. My hands began shaking. I called Jim immediately. No answer. His voicemail played. Hi, you've reached Jim the handyman. I'm currently completing a job and can't answer your call. Please leave a message. I called again, same message. Again, same message. I started leaving voicemails. Jim, this is Jeanette. Do not work on the house today. Please, don't fix anything. Just leave. Another call. Jim, I'm serious. Stop working and get out of the house. Another, please, whatever you're doing, stop. I left the hospital and drove home. I do not remember most of that journey. I remember gripping the steering wheel. I remember running red lights. I remember praying that I was wrong. When I turned onto our street, Jim's gray pickup truck was parked outside. My stomach dropped. I pulled into the driveway. At almost the exact moment I opened my car door, the front door of my house opened. Jim walked out carrying his toolbox. His clothes were spotless. His hair was neat, and that same bright smile covered his face. He looked at me. Job's all done. Then he winked. That wink changed everything. Until that moment, some part of me had still believed Jim might be innocent. Maybe the strange pattern was real, but beyond his control. Maybe he didn't understand what happened after his repairs. Maybe he was somehow connected to it without knowing. But when he winked at me, I knew. He understood. He had always understood. My phone rang. I froze. I didn't want to look at the screen. I already knew. The hospital was calling. I answered. A nurse spoke softly. Something had happened to the life support equipment. There had been an unexpected failure. They had tried to save him. They were sorry. Daryl was dead. I lowered the phone. For several seconds, the world seemed silent. Then I looked at Jim. He was still standing there, still smiling. Something inside me broke. "Get the fuck out of here," I screamed. Jim's smile widened slightly. "What the hell did you do to us? What did you do to Daryl?" He laughed, not loudly, almost politely, as though I had made a harmless joke. "Gosh, I didn't do anything to your husband. You're lying." Jim tilted his head. I suppose the universe appreciates balance as much as I do. His voice had changed. The friendliness was still there, but now I could hear something beneath it. Something cold. "There is a price for every fix." My anger disappeared. Fear replaced it. I stepped backward. "Leave?" Jim shook his head. "I'm afraid I can't do that." "Why?" "Because there is still more work to be done." He glanced at the house. "Plenty more. I'll never hire you again." Jim smiled. "That isn't really the problem, is it?" I remembered the nail, the way it had struck his skin and bounced away. I remembered his perfect appearance. No injuries, no scars, no signs of age. Whatever stood in front of me was not simply a strange handyman. It might not even have been human. Jim spread his arms slightly. "It's not like anything can get rid of me." Then his smile returned fully. "You saw that yourself, the nail." He knew I had seen it. "So," he said, "what do you want me to fix next?" I stared at him. The words echoed in my head. There is a price for every fix. Balance, something fixed, something broken. Balance, then I remembered the shirt. Weeks earlier, I had repaired Jim's torn work shirt. I had fixed something that belonged to him. The realization came so suddenly that I almost laughed. Without answering him, I turned and ran into the house. Jim called after me. "Jeanette?" I ignored him. I went straight to the place where I remembered putting the shirt after washing it for him. He had left it behind during one of his jobs and had not yet collected it. I grabbed it. Then I opened the locked drawer where Daryl kept a handgun. My hands were trembling as I carried both items outside. Jim had not moved. He watched me approach with an amused expression. I held up the shirt. "You like balance, don't you?" His smile weakened. I continued. "I fixed this." Jim's eyes moved toward the shirt. "You remember?" For the first time since I had met him, he did not answer immediately. I threw the shirt at his feet. "If every fix has a price, then fixing something of yours means I get to break something of yours." Jim looked down. His expression changed, only slightly. But I saw it. Fear, I raised the gun. He looked up. I pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening. The bullet struck Jim directly in the chest. This time, it did not bounce away. Blood sprayed across the front of his clean overalls. Jim staggered backward. He looked down at the wound as if he could not understand what he was seeing. Then he looked at me. His friendly handyman smile was gone. For perhaps 1 second, something appeared in his face that I still struggle to describe. Rage, not human anger. Something older. Something that made every instinct in my body tell me to run. But he didn't attack. Jim pressed one hand against his bleeding chest. Then he slowly turned around. He walked toward his pickup truck. His steps were uneven now. Human, painful. He climbed inside. The engine started. And without another word, Jim drove away. I stood in the driveway holding the gun until his truck disappeared. That was years ago. I still live in the same house. People have asked why I never sold it. Sometimes I ask myself the same question. Maybe I should have left immediately. Maybe any reasonable person would have. But I couldn't. Daryl and I bought this place together. We dreamed here. We planned a family here. He spent his final months watching this broken little house slowly become the home we thought we would share for the rest of our lives. In a terrible way, Darryl paid for every beautiful part of it. So I stayed. The house no longer looks like a starter home. It is warm now. Solid, comfortable. The stairs are strong. The windows are perfect. The kitchen is beautiful. The bathroom tiles still look almost new. Even after all these years, Jim's work has held up remarkably well. He never returned. At least, not yet. Sometimes I wonder whether the gunshot killed him later. I doubt it. Something tells me creatures like Jim don't die that easily. Maybe he simply learned that our arrangement was no longer worth the price. Maybe somewhere else, another young couple has just purchased an old house they cannot afford to repair. Maybe a coworker has recommended an unbelievably cheap handyman. Maybe someone, somewhere, is answering the door right now and meeting a friendly man with short brown hair, spotless overalls, and a perfectly symmetrical smile. I hope not. Every morning, I wake early and sit on the front porch with a shotgun nearby. Most people in the neighborhood probably think I am a paranoid widow. I don't care. I watch every vehicle that slows near my driveway. Every gray pickup makes my heart beat faster. Every unfamiliar tradesman gets a second look. Because if Jim ever comes back to finish his work, I'm ready. There is one thing I have to admit, though. The porch swing I sit on while watching the road is beautiful. Smooth wood, perfectly balanced, strong enough that it has never needed a single repair. Jim built it during one of his earlier visits. The bastard really was a damn good handyman. I used to work the night shift at a supermarket. It was every bit as dull as you would imagine. Most nights were spent stacking shelves beneath dim lights, unloading delivery trucks, dragging heavy pallets across the warehouse floor, and moving boxes of frozen food in and out of an industrial freezer cold enough to make your fingers ache through your gloves. The work itself wasn't difficult once you got used to it. It was the tiredness that wore you down. Night after night, this thick haze seemed to settle over my brain. Every movement felt slower than it should have. My eyes burned. My legs became heavy. By 3 or 4 in the morning, even simple things like bending down to pick up a box felt like dragging yourself through deep mud. The coffee didn't help much either. The employee calf served the worst black coffee I had ever tasted. It was bitter, burnt, and somehow managed to taste both watery and thick at the same time. Most nights, the heat burning my tongue did more to wake me up than the caffeine. And despite all of that, I actually liked the job. Once you had been working nights long enough, you developed a rhythm. You stopped thinking so much. You put an audiobook in one ear, lowered your head, and kept moving until the darkness outside the store windows slowly turned gray. 1 foot in front of the other. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Eventually, the first sunlight would appear on the horizon, and you would realize you had survived another shift. There wasn't much conversation apart from the occasional mumbling between equally exhausted coworkers. The pay was only slightly better than minimum wage, and my sleep schedule had become completely destroyed. Still, I probably would have continued working there for years if it hadn't been for my final night. I had to take a train to work because I didn't own a car. My shift began shortly after midnight, which meant every workday started with me racing through the streets trying to catch one of the last trains running through the area. That night, rain had just started when I reached the station. The old metal roof above the platform amplified each drop. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, 1 and 2. 1 and 2. I stood beneath the shelter with my hands buried inside my jacket pockets. There were other people around, but they were scattered across different platforms. When I first started traveling that late, those distant figures used to bother me. At night, people become silhouettes. You can see the steam from their breath in cold air. You can see them move. Sometimes you can tell they are looking in your direction. But you can't see their faces. When you're already tired and standing alone at a train station after midnight, your imagination starts filling in everything you cannot see. After 2 years of night shifts, I didn't care anymore. I barely had enough energy to wonder whether somebody looked suspicious. I blinked. My train was there. The 20-minute journey passed beneath the quiet voices of whatever audiobook I was listening to at the time. I don't remember what it was anymore. Something about people with lives far more interesting than mine. The train brakes screamed. My body stood before my brain had properly registered that we had arrived. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. I walked from the station toward the supermarket. Its massive illuminated sign glowed obnoxiously against the darkness. During the day, the store looked ordinary. At night, surrounded by an empty car park, it looked strange, too bright in some places, completely black in others. I walked around to the staff entrance behind the building. Delivery trucks used the same yard. The employee door was electronically locked after closing, so anyone arriving for the night shift had to press a buzzer and wait for somebody already inside to release it. I checked the time. I was early. I pressed the button. Somewhere inside the building, a loud electronic bell would be ringing. I waited. Nothing. A minute passed, then another. I pressed it again. Still nothing. By the third attempt, I held the button down longer than necessary. It was rude, but I was cold, tired, and standing alone outside in the rain. "Come on," I muttered. Another few minutes passed. Finally, I heard the lock buzz. I quickly grabbed the handle and pulled the door open. The small staff area inside was empty. The heavy door slammed shut behind me and locked automatically. Faded yellow walls surrounded me beneath a dim ceiling light. To the left was an old green door leading onto the shop floor. Its paint was chipped badly around the frame, and the hinges were so rusted that opening it usually produced a long, unpleasant groan. The door didn't move, but I heard footsteps on the other side. Slow ones. Someone walking away. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. The sound slowly disappeared into the store. I didn't find that unusual. It had happened before. Sometimes the night staff were busy when somebody buzzed. They would walk over, glance through the peephole, press the release button, and immediately return to whatever they were doing. Nobody had the energy for greetings at that hour. I headed upstairs toward the staff lounge. The main management office was on the second floor. Outside, it hung a laminated sheet showing photographs of all 5 store managers wearing painfully forced smiles. Greg, the head manager, was centered at the top. My manager for the night was pictured in the bottom corner. He had tired eyes, thinning hair, and a personality capable of making 5 minutes feel like an hour. I hated him. He was arrogant, uncompromising, and obsessed with cars. It didn't matter how many times you explained that you knew nothing about engines and had no desire to learn. He would still trap you near the lockers and spend 15 minutes explaining something about transmissions. I muttered something insulting toward his photograph as I passed. I already wore my uniform because changing at work seemed pointless. I went straight to the employee cafe and made coffee. It tasted like hot mud. Perfect. I clocked in 5 minutes early. Usually at least 4 other employees started around the same time. None of them were there. That was strange, but not impossible. Most of them drove. Maybe there had been an accident somewhere. Maybe roadworks. Maybe they were all late for completely unrelated reasons. I wasn't paid enough to investigate. I finished enough coffee to burn my throat, tossed the cup away, and headed downstairs. one foot after another. One and two. One and two. I opened the green door. Its hinges screamed through the quiet building. The shop floor was mostly dark. Large supermarkets don't leave every overhead light running overnight. Only a few sections remained illuminated, creating long strips of weak white light between enormous areas of shadow. It was enough to work, not enough to make the place comfortable. Far down the central aisle, I thought I saw somebody walking away from me. Just a silhouette. For half a second, it crossed through one of the illuminated sections. Then, it disappeared behind the shelves. There you are, I muttered. At least somebody else was working. I headed toward the warehouse. The supermarket was basically a giant rectangle, so I followed the wall along one side. The freezer section released its usual chill as I passed. My footsteps mixed with the low electrical humming overhead. One and two. One and two. When I reached the warehouse entrance, I noticed the door had been held open with a fire extinguisher. That was unusual. Fire safety was one of the few things management actually trained us properly on. You absolutely were not supposed to prop fire doors open. I assumed someone was unloading a delivery. Then, I noticed something else. The warehouse lights were off. I stepped inside. Darkness. I reached along the wall for the switch. Couldn't find it. I moved my hand farther. Still nothing. The lights should already be on, I whispered. The closing crew normally left them running for us. I searched the opposite side. Finally, my fingers found the switch. I pressed it. Nothing, bollocks. Maybe that explained why nobody was around. Electrical problem. Somebody was probably trying to fix it. Then I stopped. No, that didn't make sense. You didn't need an entire night crew to investigate a broken light. I was about to turn around when something reflected the weak light coming from the shop floor. A puddle. Water had spread across part of the warehouse floor. Shit. I immediately thought about the freezers. If the power had failed, thousands of pounds worth of frozen food could be thawing. Management would lose their minds. I stepped through the puddle. Water seemed to be coming from beneath the industrial freezer door. The cooler beside it was still running. I could hear it. That made even less sense. Lights off. Freezer melting. Cooler working. So the entire warehouse hadn't lost power. I stood there trying to understand it when I heard something. Drip, drip, pause, drip, drip, one and two. One and two. It came from inside the freezer. I reached toward the handle. Clang, I jumped backward. For one horrible second, my heart seemed to stop. Another bang rang through the warehouse. Then, another. But it wasn't coming from the freezer. It came from outside. Behind the metal roller shutter was the delivery yard. I grabbed the keys hanging beside the exit and pushed open the smaller door. Cold air hit my face. Another metallic bang. Clang, a delivery truck was parked outside the locked gate. The driver was kicking it. The vehicle was painted the same ridiculous green as the supermarket branding. I had completely forgotten a delivery was scheduled. I felt embarrassed by how badly the noise had frightened me. Just a truck driver. Normal problem. Normal night. I walked toward the gate. One and two. One and two. The driver glared at me. What the fuck took you so long? He was shorter than me, but not by much. Gray stubble covered his face, his head was shaved, and the streetlights made the top of his scalp shine. Sorry, I said, searching through the keys. We've got some kind of power problem. Freezer might be down. Haven't seen anyone else since I got here. Not my problem. I've got 4 more stores tonight. Wonderful personality. I unlocked the gate without arguing. He drove inside and began turning the truck around so he could reverse toward the warehouse shutter. While I waited, I looked up at the supermarket. One of the upper windows was illuminated. A shadow stood behind it. Someone Finally, I couldn't see who it was, but at least one coworker was upstairs. Then the shadow raised an arm. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Their hands seemed to be tapping against the glass. I stared. Something about it bothered me. They weren't waving. They weren't trying to get my attention. They simply stood there. Watching, the truck horn blasted. I jumped. The driver leaned out of his window, glaring. I locked the gate again and looked at the upstairs window. The silhouette was still there. I couldn't see its face, but I felt certain it was looking directly at me. I returned to the warehouse. The driver backed into position. I raised the roller shutter. 6 large pallets filled the truck. He looked around. Where's everyone else? Like I said, I haven't seen anyone. If you want this unloaded quickly, go upstairs to the lounge and tell them to get down here. He gave me an annoyed look. Then he walked away. His footsteps moved through the shop floor. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. I dragged the first pallet from the truck. It was heavy. I slowly pulled it toward the far side of the warehouse. Then my boot made a wet sound. Squelch, I looked down. The puddle had spread. Closer to the door now. The pale light from the shop floor reached across it. And for the first time, I saw its color. It wasn't water. My heart changed rhythm. Beat, beat, pause, beat, beat, drip, drip, pause, drip, drip, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. I turned toward the freezer. My hand reached for the handle. Click, the heavy door slid open. Freezing air poured into the warehouse. The lights inside the freezer were working perfectly, bright white. For a second, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Crates and boxes had been piled against the far wall. Too many, placed strangely, almost deliberately. The dripping came from behind them. Drip, 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 I stepped inside. I stopped counting my footsteps. I moved the first box. Then another. Then another. I wish I hadn't. There are things your brain refuses to understand immediately because accepting them would be worse. At first, I thought I was looking at meat. Then I saw a hand. A human hand. Then an arm. A face. Later, the police told me there were 6 bodies. 6 employees. They had been forced together into one horrible, tangled mass behind the crates. Limbs bent where limbs shouldn't bend. Bodies twisted together. Frozen blood covered parts of the floor. And staring directly toward me was my manager, the asshole from the photograph, the man who talked endlessly about cars. His eyes were open. His jaw hung loosely. Frozen blood had collected around his lips. A drop slowly formed, then fell. Drip, drip, pause, drip, drip. I ran. No rhythm anymore. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I sprinted from the freezer. I reached for the keys beside the warehouse exit. Gone, the truck driver. He must have taken them when he went upstairs. The fire door. I slammed my shoulder against it. Nothing, again, nothing, a third time. It didn't move. Then I heard footsteps. From the shop floor. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Slow, calm, approaching, I looked through the warehouse doorway. The silhouette I had seen earlier was moving between the shelves, coming toward me. I had 2 choices: hide in the warehouse with 6 bodies, or run toward whatever was walking through the store. I waited 1 heartbeat, then ran. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. My shoes slammed against the floor as I raced along the aisles. Behind me, the footsteps continued. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. They weren't running. That frightened me more. Whatever followed me didn't seem worried about losing me. I reached the green door and yanked it open. The hinges screamed. I entered the staff area. The exit door was directly ahead. I slammed against it and repeatedly hit the release button. Nothing, dead. Behind me, 1 and 2. 1 and 2. I ran upstairs. Halfway up, I stumbled. My knee struck a step. I pushed myself back up. Then I heard footsteps above me. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. I froze. There was something downstairs and something upstairs, both moving toward me. I pressed myself against the wall. My hand covered my mouth. I listened. The footsteps below continued approaching. The footsteps above did the same. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. For the first time in years, I was completely awake. No tiredness, no haze, nothing except pure panic. I looked around. No windows, no open doors. Then I saw the gap between the upper and lower sections of the staircase. It was narrow, a terrible idea. I climbed over the railing anyway. I lowered myself into the gap. My body barely fit. I squeezed downward until only my hands remained gripping the bottom of the railing. My fingertips burned. My nails scraped against painted metal. One tore. I nearly cried out. Below me, the green door opened. Screech! Footsteps entered. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. They became faster. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. They passed directly beneath me. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped at the top of the staircase. Silence. My injured fingers were slipping. One nail tore farther. I felt my body drop slightly. If I fell, the sound would give me away. Then the upstairs door opened. Another pause. Bang, glass shattered. Something heavy hit the stairs. Wet, thick A-body. Blood began running toward the edge. Drip, drip, pause, drip, drip, a drop landed on my face. Then another. I smelled iron. The truck driver. I knew before I saw him, the man I had sent upstairs. I hung there while his blood ran down my hands. Eventually, the footsteps moved away. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Farther. My grip finally failed. I let go. I landed below as quietly as I could. Pain shot through my ankles. I didn't care. I needed to escape. The fire doors might be jammed. The front entrance was locked. I needed keys. Then I remembered. The manager's office. Emergency keys were kept there. I squeezed through the railing gap and climbed the stairs. The truck driver lay twisted across the steps. One of his limbs was bent so badly that I couldn't tell whether I was looking at an arm or a leg. Bones showed through torn clothing. I kept my eyes down. I had sent him up there. That thought followed me with every step. At the upper landing, a broken window overlooked the stairs. I crouched and looked through. Darkness, no movement, no footsteps. That was almost worse. Something could have been standing 5 feet away, hidden in the room, and I wouldn't have seen it. I crawled toward the door, slowly opened it. No groaning hinges this time, only a quiet click. The manager's office was a few feet away. I entered. Behind the cheap desk was the hook. Keys, I grabbed them. They jingled. And immediately, from behind me, 1 and 2. 1 and 2, I dropped behind the desk. The office door opened. I crawled underneath. Footsteps entered. 1 and 2, 1 and 2. I held my hand over my mouth. The thing moved slowly around the room. I forced myself to breathe with its steps. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. 1 and 2, 1 and 2. My chest burned. My heartbeat sounded deafening inside my skull. I was certain it could hear me. Then the footsteps turned away. They crossed the room. The door closed. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Fading, I waited. Then crawled out. I moved downstairs, past the body, back toward the green door, the old green bastard door. Opening it normally would cause a scream loud enough to announce my location to the entire store. I couldn't run either. The entrance had 2 sets of glass doors. I needed time to unlock both. So I moved slowly. I pressed the handle down. The hinges groaned. I stopped. Listen, nothing. I opened it another inch. Another groan. Eventually, there was enough room for me to squeeze through. The shop floor lights were completely off now. I crouched. Far away, footsteps moved around the edge of the store. One and two, one and two. They were patrolling, looking for me. I crept toward the entrance. My fingers were covered in blood from my torn nails. I reached the first glass door, inserted the key, waited. One and two, one and two. The footsteps were at the far end. This was my chance. I turned the key. Then behind me, scree-each. The green door opened. One and two. One and two. I turned the lock. The security alarm exploded through the building. The footsteps changed. One, two, three, one, two, three, running. I threw open the first door. Entered the foyer. One, two, three, four. One, two, three, four. I reached the final glass door. My hands shook so badly that the key missed the lock. Behind me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Fast, too fast. I dropped the key. Something slammed into my back. The world became glass. I crashed straight through the entrance. My body hit the pavement outside. Broken glass sliced into my palms. My back felt like it had been struck by a car. I rolled, pushed myself up. My legs worked. Barely, that was enough. I ran, or tried to. It was more of a desperate limp. I crossed the empty parking lot. Fell, hit my shoulder, got back up, kept moving. I didn't turn around. I continued until the supermarket's glowing sign disappeared behind buildings. Then my legs stopped working. I collapsed onto cold concrete. I don't know how long I lay there. Minutes, maybe longer. Eventually, headlights appeared. A car stopped. Someone touched my shoulder. I flinched violently. Then, I recognized the voice. Greg, the head manager. He had been called because nobody could reach the overnight staff. Within an hour, I was inside an ambulance. Police surrounded the supermarket. I told them there had been a break-in. That was the only explanation I could give them without sounding insane. The formal interview afterward is mostly a blur. Could I describe the attackers? No. How many were there? At least 2. Had anything been stolen? Not that I noticed. Had I seen any of my coworkers? Yes, 6 of them. In the freezer. The supermarket eventually reopened. I was never officially fired at first. I simply stopped showing up. Nobody called to ask why. A letter arrived later confirming that I no longer worked there. Fine by me. I still work retail. Day shifts only. Different supermarket. Different managers. Different coworkers. Normal lights. Customers everywhere. Noise. I never thought I would be grateful for screaming children and people arguing over discount coupons. But the nightmares followed me. I still don't know what was inside that supermarket. I don't know whether the silhouettes were people. I don't know how 6 employees ended up inside the freezer without anyone calling for help. I don't know why the figure at the upstairs window tapped against the glass. And I don't know what hit me hard enough to send my body through a locked glass door without simply finishing me there. Sometimes I wonder if it wanted me to escape. That thought bothers me more than anything else. Because if it wanted me dead, I think I would be dead. Even now, years later, there are nights when I wake around 2 or 3 in the morning and cannot get back to sleep. The house will be silent. Then someone outside will walk along the pavement. I hear their footsteps approaching my front door. Slow, steady, 1 and 2. 1 and 2. I hold my breath. The footsteps pass. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. And every single time, I count them until I can't hear them anymore. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, Just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.